I was out there with you yesterday, boy. I love that program. I have to admit, I was pretty impressed with Marco Rubio. I mean, he knows his football. But, and I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of the same things you heard yesterday, but do want to talk a little bit, and we'll have a great panel for you. But first, I want to thank you for all you do for the game. It is appreciated, and not only for the game, but for your players. And I know we've got commissioners, coaches, all different kinds of people involved in the game, but it's a crucial time, I think, for the sport. You heard about it yesterday. I think it's really, the game is under attack from a number of different places. I think particularly, I don't want to sound like President Trump, but the liberal media has got football in its crosshairs. And, as I think Scott mentioned yesterday, the narrative is very, very negative. And, there's no problem, there's no question. We do have issues in the game at the NFL level and others. We need to make the right decisions to make the game safer. But I think it's really a mistake to focus solely on the risks associated with football and to not focus on the tremendous benefits. And you all know them, and you heard them yesterday, the benefits. And I'll talk a little bit about my background, but to me, there's no better sport for teaching life lessons about things like teamwork, discipline, dedication, resiliency. Football is needed in this society. You look at the leaders across our country, CEOs, generals. A high percentage of those have come up through football, and it's not an accident. It's because of the leadership skills that they developed and learned from people like you. Mike talked a little bit about my career. I feel very fortunate. From my professional career, so I played 8 years with the Redskins. I was very fortunate. And really, except for 4 years when I worked for the Justice Department, not a lot of football cases when I was a lawyer with the Justice Department, but except for those 4 years, I've been involved in football one way or another. And I really feel very fortunate. I think probably like a lot of you, I feel like I owe so much to football, and I want to give back to football. And so I just thought I'd talk a little bit about that, and particularly the coaches that have shaped me throughout my career. Going on, I first played football. That's a big question now, and I think Scott Hollenbach is doing a great job, the USA football staff. With the pathway and flag football and rookie and now the 9-on-9, getting people into the pipeline. And again, there's parents legitimately have concerns. And, I think about the safety of the game. But, I think as people said yesterday, from what I've seen, the game is safer than it's ever been. I mean, the changes we've made in the NFL over the last 10 years, I think we've made over 40 rules changes focused primarily on safety, making the game safer, taking the head out of the game. So there's a lot of positive things going on, and I think you don't want to get caught up in all the negative talk. So I started playing the game in 6th grade. I was kind of a skinny kid, not a great athlete, but it was, that's the one good thing about football as compared to other sports. And I'll talk a little bit. I worked as an athletic director at the Division I level for 17 years. So I've seen all different sports. And I think we heard it a little bit yesterday. Participation in all sports is great. But the benefits from football are so tangible and so direct that no other sport really can compare to it, in my mind, in terms of life lessons. And I was very fortunate, going back to, I don't want to bore you with my grade school career, but I started playing football in 6th grade, and I was very skinny, I was always a late bloomer, late to mature. But I could snap the ball well, so and this is how old I am, we had single wing offense, and I was the only one on the team that could snap the ball pretty accurately, so I played center for my first 2 years of football, and it kind of got me into it, and just really enjoyed it. Ended up playing high school football in Clarence, New York. I think we've got some people here from Clarence. None of you have ever heard of it. It's a suburb of Buffalo, but really enjoyed that. Had a great coach there, a man named John Gaddy. And then went on to Colgate, played at Colgate. And one of the things I look at, and I'll talk a little bit about what I call, as an athletic director, dealt with a lot of different types of athletes, and I've obviously with the Packers now, my time with the Redskins. One of the things that I've seen is what I call the elite athlete syndrome. If you're an elite athlete, you are given special treatment all through the system. And, to be quite honest, it's much worse in other sports than football, basketball, some of the others. And so what I would, all of you are in a position, to me, keeping people grounded, particularly at the high school level and college, keeping them grounded, keeping them focused. At the NFL, the college level, the high school level, competition is the best thing for anybody. And having to compete and know that you have to prove yourself and you're not entitled to anything is very, very important. And I was very fortunate, as Mike mentioned, I played 8 years with the Redskins. I played with 2 Hall of Fame coaches. My rookie year, I played for a man named George Allen. Some of you may know that name. Then played a number of years with Jack Pardee. Then finished the last 5 years of my career with Joe Gibbs. And so to be able to, it was probably just a handful of us that played with for both George Allen and Joe Gibbs. And learned so much. There probably couldn't be more different people, but both, as I mentioned, Hall of Fame coaches. George is probably the most innovative defensive coach of his time. He invented the nickel defense. And so for me, as a young defensive player, to be able to learn directly from him, his leadership style was he was very enthusiastic. I'll share a funny story. It's kind of my introduction to the NFL moment. So back then, they didn't have all the draft shows and the mock drafts, and nobody knew, you didn't really know when you're going to be drafted. And so I played at Colgate, obviously not a great school, not a great football school. It was non-scholarship at the time. And so I wasn't sure. Some scouts had come around and agents had said, Mark, it looks like you might be drafted in the middle of the draft. Now back then there were 12 rounds. So first day of the draft, I get a call, and it's George Allen. And George says, Mark, we really like you. We want to draft you, and we are going to fly you down to Washington. We're going to have a press conference, and we're going to announce that we're going to draft you. And, I'm just in heaven. I mean, I couldn't believe it. We didn't have cell phones then, so I take a cab up to Syracuse Airport, fly down to Washington, D.C., and so it was about 6 o'clock, and so the draft was over 2 days, and the first day had just ended. So I figured, first thing in the morning, I'm going to get up, press conference. They're going to announce that they're going to draft me. So staying out at the Marriott Hotel by Dulles Airport, where the Redskins facility was then. Excuse me. And all of a sudden they say, Mark, I want to put you in a van. I said, fine, that's great. And there were about 4 or 5 other players, and they put us in a van, and they took us. Now, Dulles Airport's probably about half an hour, 45 minutes from downtown Washington. And they took us in the van, and we went downtown. They gave us a really nice tour of Washington, D.C., but I kept looking at my watch. It's like, when's the press conference? I'm going to be drafted soon. And so they had lunch, and then, they showed us some of the monuments, and it was very, very nice. And then about 4 or 5 o'clock, took us out to the Redskins practice facility. George Allen calls me into a room, and he says, Mark, you weren't drafted, but we really like you, want to sign you as a free agent. Here's a contract. Why don't you take a minute to look at it and sign it? And then he turned to his assistant and said, if Mark doesn't sign this, let's get that safety from Oklahoma on the phone that we like so much. So to make a long story short, the Redskins had no interest at all in drafting me. So that was my, and you may wonder, why the hell did you go with the Redskins? So, I ended up, I called back to my apartment at school, and my girlfriend, who is my wife now, said, where the hell have you been? I said, what do you mean? I've been calling the hotel, Well, the hotel had given the operator their instructions to say that if anybody called for Mark Murphy, to say that, that he was no longer there and he wasn't available. So nobody could get in touch with me. So I ended up signing with the Redskins. They were the only team that wanted me to play safety. Every other team wanted me to put some weight on and move to linebacker. But it's a funny story. In my position now, I get the opportunity to interact quite a bit with Bruce Allen, who is George Allen's son. And I just went up to him last year. I just wondered, and I said, Bruce, you know, did your father ever tell you what he did to me on the draft day? And he said, "I'll quit complaining. It worked out all right." So that was my welcome to the NFL moment. And playing for Joe Gibbs, just a tremendous honor. And it just, you know, Joe, and I was very fortunate. I was kind of I was about halfway through my career, and I was captain of the team. And so for me to be able to see him come in and set up his program was just invaluable, particularly as it relates to leadership. And one of the things that I really took from him, it's a very sophisticated management principle. Have any of you ever heard of the principle called MWA? It's management by wandering around. And it sounds kind of corny, but I really do believe in it, and Joe Gibbs would do that. He'd walk to the locker room, he'd sit down, and he'd say, you know, what are the players thinking? What kind of things do you think would work this week? And that's something that I, to this day, continue to do. I would share a funny story in terms of the impact with Joe Gibbs. And it's very similar to what one of the real fortunate things in my career is that I get the opportunity to interact with a lot of our great former players, particularly those from the Lombardi era. And you know, talking to a Jerry Kramer or Bart Starr, Dave Robinson, they say, we knew right away when Lombardi started, his first few meetings we had with him, we knew right away things were going to be different. And I had the same feeling with Joe Gibbs. You know, when you have a great coach, you can sense it. And, you know, we won a Super Bowl in our second year with Joe Gibbs, and I don't have to tell you what a tremendous coach he is. You know, as an athletic director, after my career ended with the Redskins, worked for about 4 or 5 years for the National Football League Players Association, so I've seen football from that perspective. Really enjoyed that experience. And then had the opportunity to get back involved in intercollegiate athletics as the athletic director at Colgate, and was an athletic director for 17 years, both at Colgate and Northwestern. And as I mentioned before, you know, I see every sport. I mean, participation in any sport is great, but a couple things for me stand out about football. The teamwork aspect. At the youth level and the high school level, there are no cuts, so everybody can participate. And one of the things that I saw as an athletic director, one of the really, I think, unfortunate aspects that we've seen in terms of athletics is the trend towards specialization. And you know, I think football is probably the most difficult sport to specialize and do year-round. I know, you know, there's 7-on-7 and passing leagues, but I would say to the extent that we can resist the temptation to specialize and do it year-round, I think it's best for the young men, and for everybody. You know, I see what I saw, the specialization of in the other sports. For instance, if you're an elite basketball player, you know, you're going to be playing AAU, you're going to be playing spring basketball, you're going to be playing year-round. First of all, it's not good for your body, you're wearing out. And you know the other thing, the worst thing about specialization? It gets the parents much more involved. And I know a lot of you are parents, I'm just telling you. And probably a lot of you have some stories about parents you can tell. But with the specialization, the parents are much more directly involved in their children's athletic careers, and that is not a good thing. I can tell you stories at Colgate and Northwestern of all kinds of parents coming in and complaining about the playing time of their sons or daughters. You know, one of the best things about athletics is the lessons that you can learn from it, but if your parents are overly involved in it, it completely changes that dynamic. Yeah, before I turn it over, I just want to say how much respect I have for Scott Hollenbach and the great people at USA Football. It is a challenge what they're doing, but to see how this has changed. I first started in the youth football space when Paul Tagliabue, who all of you know, the commissioner of the NFL, and Gene Upshaw got together and said, we really need to do something to make sure that young boys and girls are continuing to play football. And they started the Youth Football Fund. That has evolved into the USA Football. And I just think they're doing great things, and I'm really excited about the future of football. It is important, you know, and I think Marco touched a little bit on it. Marco, I talked like he's a friend of mine, Marco. Senator Rubio talked a little bit about it. We need sports, and you know, we do need football in the future. I think for the good of our society, for developing leaders, for the lessons that people learn, it's invaluable.